Now, a new report has found that corporate South Africa is not in love with the fourth industrial revolution. Wide Worx, in conjunction with SYSPRO, conducted research found that many of the technologies that make up the so-called fourth industrial revolution have yet to be adopted with enthusiasm by South African enterprises, although there is some enthusiasm about robotics. It focused this research on the planned update of emerging technology like artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, the Internet of Things and blockchain. To discuss all things 4IR, we're joined by the CEO of Wide Worx, Arthur Goldstuck. Great to have you with us.
Good evening,
Arthur.
Francis.
Can we start with a definition, please? Because we're going to talk about two things. Artificial intelligence, which sometimes suggests a robot, something with artificial intelligence, but it's different to robotics. Can you separate those two things for us?
Sure. There is a strong relationship, but artificial intelligence is really the ability of computers to take over a lot of the processes that humans usually conduct. Now, machines can do that, production lines can do that, so it has to be more than that. There has to be intelligence built in it. And what that refers to is that the machine becomes smart and it seems to think for itself. It can
evolve in a sense.
It can evolve and can learn from what it does. And as it learns, it improves what it does without human intervention. And then at the same time, it takes over decision making at a very low level. At the moment, machines aren't allowed to take over completely.
Okay, so you tell us more, because you say there's no enthusiasm for artificial intelligence despite all the hype around it.
So a year ago we asked the question, do you currently use artificial intelligence? And we had about 13% of enterprises in South Africa saying yes. But are you planning to use it in the future? 63% said that they were planning to adopt AI because there was so much hype around it, so much enthusiasm. The fourth industrial revolution was being hyped to the hilt and everyone wanted to be part of it. And then they started investigating it and more information started emerging. The warnings about job losses started emerging. So enthusiasm waned dramatically. This year, in proportion of companies that are using it is still 13%, but those that plan to use it has plummeted from 63% a year ago down to 21% this year.
You actually say the more hype there is, the less interested South African companies are.
Normally when there's hype, there's growing interest, but I think the hype reached a peak, fortunately perhaps too early, and people suddenly realized that what they were being sold was not what they were probably going to get. In other words, it wouldn't have the impact on their businesses that the hype suggests. In other words, it wouldn't quite operate as advertised.
So it's not that we're scared of machines or trying to protect jobs. We just don't see the value yet.
That's exactly what it is. So what our research showed across all these technologies is where the specific emerging technology has relevance for a business, then they will consider adopting it. But they're not going to adopt it for its own sake. And a year ago there was far more of that because of the hype around the fourth industrial revolution and the government especially pushing it very hard as a necessity for this country. A lot of companies simply wanted to embrace it for the sake of embracing it, being part of the party, so to speak.
Is there any danger now, we'll move to the other things like robotics, but is there any danger that South African companies aren't seeing the value and there will be a cost to not adopting it now?
Yes, no, that is definitely an issue that faces the enterprise market.
Where could AI be used?
So, for example, servicing customers better. That's the ultimate promise of artificial intelligence, that you don't have to deal with these call centers that really make dealing with a big company a nightmare. Just yesterday I dealt with 3 different call centers and I was kept on the phone probably a total of an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's traumatic.
The waste of my time, and then multiply that across the thousands and thousands of people who experience the same thing. It's a drain of productivity and it's traumatic for us as individuals.
But you do get those options now. Would you like voice recognition? Would you like to do things online rather than speak to an agent? Is that AI?
It's partly AI. It's more what they call robotic process automation, and that's when you come to robotics again. But the problem with it is they're not using proper AI in these processes. They're simply using an either-or option in most cases. So it's press button 1 or button 2. You just happen to be doing it with voice instead of with your fingers when they move over to voice-controlled systems. So going from manual control to voice control doesn't make it smart, but a lot of companies think that is what smart technology is.
You actually want the service
Correct.
behind
Yes,
it.
Exactly.
Okay, so on the other hand, there is robotics. So tell us where that is. You're actually saying there's a robotics boom. So there is uptake there.
So initially, when we asked about robotics a year ago, everyone was thinking of these humanoid robots come clunking into the office and bringing your tea, for example. And they were going to take jobs away from people, manual jobs. But the reality is that the real software or the real robotic revolution is in software. It's something called robotic process automation, which really means automating processes using software. And we experience it through software bots, which are essentially these chat tools that seem to understand what we are saying and respond to what we're saying. They're being used extensively for giving financial advice, but also for getting more information about your account, for example. But most of the bots that we're seeing are still very, very primitive, but it is the beginning of that software robotics revolution. And we saw massive uptake in the last year because the platforms that make it's RPA for short, robotics process automation. The RPA platforms are suddenly widespread, they're cheap. It's like building a website on one of these automated platforms. Software robots are now the same thing.
I saw a practical example you mentioned in your research. So lawyers often look at precedent and they have to go back years and years and years. But now these bots can sort of trail through and pick up keywords, I presume, and
exactly.
find the precedent.
That's the good news and the bad news. The good news is that the software bots...
They can only use keywords, I guess.
They can use keywords, but they can also be programmed to look for combinations of words as well, and that's where they become really powerful. And that's fantastic for law firms. It's cut down the time that they spend on research for cases dramatically. The bad news is that there's now less work for the article clerk, for the intern, and therefore in the future there are going to be fewer positions for entry-level lawyers, and that suddenly means there's going to be a problem with the supply of new lawyers into the industry.
Okay, and they don't get to flip through all that legal precedent. What about an industry like mining? There was a fear that masses of people would lose their jobs, maybe the drillers to these automatic drilling machines. What's happening there?
There's two sides to that story as well. People will lose their jobs to certain kinds of machines. And in fact, we've seen the mining sector being the single biggest industry sector in taking up physical robots, hardware robots. They're not, again, the humanoids marching into the mine to do the drilling, but rather things like robotic arms that do sorting of, let's say, diamond or gold-bearing soil, for example. Or they're doing specialized drilling, precision drilling, and also in very dangerous conditions, you'll find that you can't really send humans in. It's not just taking away their jobs, it's actually unethical to send humans into certain environments, and robots can actually do the job in those environments. I've seen those robots at Davos that go through the rubble after an earthquake, say, and look for survivors. That's a very good example.
So finally, what does this research mean for you? Do you think as South Africa we're taking a practical approach, or are we just not getting it and we're going to be left behind?
We think we're taking a practical approach. What we're really doing is cherry picking, choosing the specific elements of the fourth industrial revolution that work for our organizations. But it also means that we're avoiding embracing the broader idea of the fourth industrial revolution, and we're going to miss out on a lot of opportunity. So the truth actually lies between the cheerleaders on the one side. One of our sayings that we have at the moment is beware the cheerleaders of the fourth industrial revolution, because they're going to drive you into spending a lot of money on technology that you don't need. But at the same time, beware the naysayers of the fourth industrial revolution, those that say that this technology won't work for you, because the more cautious you are, the more your competitors who embrace it are going to leap ahead of you.
All right, so basically be practical, but also keep an open mind.
Yes, and have a vision for what this can mean for your organization.
All right, thank you so much. Valuable research. That was the CEO of Wide Worx, Arthur Goldstuck. Now.